very much for inviting me. Pleasure to be here. So cool. And it's especially nice for me to speak in front of anthropologists and people from disciplines other than psychology. Sometimes I wonder if I actually am still a psychologist. I'm not exactly sure. So just to give you a little bit of background to my work before I sort of dig into the studies that I want to share with you today. So very broadly speaking, I have been working with what I call a Vygotskyan sort of model, a theory of human cognition. And what this means to me is that I think that shared intentionality, this ability that humans have to sort of put their heads together in acts of cooperation and joint attention, is unique to our species, and that this really forms the foundation and a very fundamental ability that underlies our culture, our way of communicating with one another, so human conventional communication systems, institutional reality, the social ontological realities that we have shaped. I think that that really lies at the heart of it. And one phenomenon which I think sort of in which this ability manifests itself from early on is joint attention, and that's mainly what I have studied in the past, is infants' ability to look at things together with other people in the environment. It's something that we absolutely take for granted because it happens all the time. And no mother of a 9-year-old will be very surprised when he or she suddenly starts pointing at things for her in the environment. But we think that this is a really marks an anthropological difference and is really important because it sets the ground for predication and it sets the ground for language acquisition and really this ability to sort of come together in cooperation. My general line has been that I think that this ability to jointly attend to things together in the environment feeds into perspective taking. Humans have to be very good perspective takers because our way of communicating with one another and cooperating with one another affords that we be able to take another person's point of view or perspective. And I have come up with a model of perspective taking in young childhood and infancy. And the idea basically is that out of this ability to jointly attend to the environment with others develops, first of all, a perspective-taking capacity, and then second of all, a genuine understanding of perspectives as what they are, as perspectives. This might sound a little funny that you have that differentiation there, but we really think that kids kind of adopt, not unconsciously, but without understanding exactly what they're doing, another's perspective before they really know, yes, at an explicit level, there can be multiple perspectives, and I always just have one of those perspectives, but there are others, and there's a multiplicity of perspectives possible, and all that. We think that that is actually the second step. Okay, so we do believe that toddlers are very competent perspective takers, and today I want to show you some examples that show how good they are at perspective taking, and specifically I want to focus on their non-elicited perspective taking. So these are situations where they aren't asked to adopt another person's point of view. It's absolutely spontaneous, and in one of these cases it would actually be better if they forgot for a moment that there are other perspectives. So the first thing I want to share with you are two experiments in which we looked at their what I call the mutualistic conception of seeing, which means that they will state at a young age, children will state that they cannot see you unless you can see them also at the same time. And I want to show you some experiments on that. And then in the second half of the talk, I want to talk a little bit about their anticipations of other person's misguided acts. So this falls in the false belief or theory of mind development literature. And here we looked for the first time at their way of affectively anticipating what another person is going to do and how reality will impact him as an individual, the affective implications of erring, basically, of being wrong. That's something that we assessed for the first time. No one has ever looked at that before. Everyone has focused on sort of rational measures and cold cognitive perceptual measures to look at false belief understanding, and we're sort of the first to look at the affective side of things there. Okay, So let's look at these first two experiments in which we looked at their mutualistic conception of seeing. So this is how I want to motivate that. You are all probably familiar with the fact that children love to play hide and seek, right? They kind of want to do it all the time, but they're really bad at it. So they kind of hide like this. So this child will think of herself or himself that he's perfectly well hidden. Same here. Another case. So basically children hide, or they try to hide, but they don't really hide very successfully. And you may have noticed that if you have, like, I don't know, children or nieces or nephews, you notice that they do this kind of thing. So why do they hide in this ridiculous way? I mean, it's not very effective. And the thesis that has tried to capture that is the egocentrism idea. So here the idea obviously is that, well, the child just thinks, well, because I cannot see anything, the other cannot see anything either, right? So we may call this the ostrich fallacy. So if I cannot see anything, this applies generally across the board to people around me. So they generalize from their own case, in this case, their own limited perception. However, we don't think that that's true. And I want to give a few examples of why that cannot really be what's going on. So first of all, so by the way, egocentrism obviously means that they cannot take your perspective. They're locked into their own perspective. We actually do know that they are really good at visual perspective taking at the age of 3. They can sort of put themselves in another's shoes and understand what he or she sees from a given viewpoint. We did experiments with color filters showing that they understand, 3-year-olds already understand that another person might see an object in a different color because she sees it through a filter. So we don't really believe that at that age they're really that unable when it comes to perspective taking. Another fact that's interesting in this context is that they consider covering one's eyes as a successful strategy. So when they see 2 dolls and one is hiding from the other by covering her eyes, and you ask the child, is she doing a good job at hiding? Is she hidden? They will say, yeah, perfect. She's hidden from the other doll. So you see that they think that actually persons in general, even when they themselves are uninvolved, are hidden when they cover their eyes from another person. And also children judge that they cannot see another whose eyes are closed. So if you were to sit facing a 3-year-old and you shut your eyes, they will say that they cannot see you. So this shows you that egocentrism cannot really explain that, right? Because so in the second case here, the ego is not even involved. They're not part of the hiding. They're judging the hiding abilities of others vis-a-vis third persons. So egocentrism just cannot explain any of this. And instead, we believe that it is their basic readiness and their preparedness for reciprocity and reciprocated gaze and eye contact that lets them answer in the way they do. So just to give you a few examples, young kids are extremely sort of tuned to making eye contact, right? So they prefer faces over geometric figures, over non-faces. They prefer open eyes versus closed eyes, and they also want to be looked at. They prefer direct gaze over averted gaze. So they're just kind of already ready to step into that nexus with another person. And what might sort of positively feed into that is this unique eye morphology that humans have, at least among the primates. I don't think that this holds true across all animals. There's certainly animals that have a white sclera, but if you limit your scope to primates, then it has been found that humans are the only ones that have a white sclera. So what does that do? Well, it exposes your gaze. It basically shows another individual where you're looking. And some people, like my PhD advisor, Mike Tomasello, and others, have used this empirical fact about the morphology as ground for some evolutionary storytelling. Whether that might be true or not, it's certainly speculative. But they say that this suggests that this has evolved because we can afford to give away our gaze direction. We can afford to inform others where we're looking. Where we're looking is often informative about what we're attending to or what we're up to, what we're about to do. And in the case of humans, individuals can afford that. Why? Well, because we have this cooperative structure underlying our interaction, and it's unlikely that the other guy who sees me looking over there at the food is going to snatch it away from me. That's the story. I'm not saying that that's my story, but that is sort of the story. And it is interesting that our eyes pop out in this particular fashion. So basically what I infer from all this is that, and I want to show you some experiments, I will get to them in a second, is that these kids have a mutualistic conception of seeing. So that means I see you only if you see me too. So we have to see each other for one individual to see another. That makes sense, right? So generically, one could say, because the child doesn't have to be involved in the interaction, this also for her holds true of two third persons making eye contact. So generically, you can say one can only see another when both see each other. So I want to compare their understanding of seeing a person when the object of perception is a person. That's, of course, the requirement. This doesn't hold true for seeing books and tables because they don't have eyes and thus cannot reciprocate gaze. But for any creature that can reciprocate gaze, for them, it's a bipolar act, meaning just like giving or telling, I can only give you something if you take up my offer. Right? If you reject my offer, I never gave you anything. So my giving depends on your taking. It makes it complete. And the same with telling. I can say all kinds of things, but if you either are hard of hearing or you hear what I say but don't take it up, you don't believe what I say, or you ignore what I say, then I failed to tell you anything. I may have said a bunch of things, but I didn't really tell you anything. So this is that. The sort of felicity conditions of these acts are dependent on a form of uptake on the end of the receiver. And I think that that holds true for kids, that they apply this uptake criterion to the case of seeing. So eye contact is necessary for me to see you. All right, so here we go. I want to now talk a little bit about perceptual verbs, because I ran an experiment in which I wanted to see if 3-year-olds understand the difference between look and see. Both are obviously perceptual verbs, but one, according to Gilbert Ryle, this is the great philosopher Gilbert Ryle, he distinguished between perceptual inspection verbs and perceptual detection verbs. And look, for example, would be, according to him, an inspection verb, just like search or scan or something like that. Aim is another example. It's not perceptual in this case, but it gives you an idea. So that refers to an activity, right? It denotes an activity of a person who can choose to either do that or not. And so these verbs admit the imperative mood. You can say, look, with an exclamation point. Right? Look over there. You can ask someone to look, tell someone to look somewhere. It admits continuous tense. I was looking outside my window between 8 and 10 o'clock last night. And it also admits qualifiers of manner and care. So you can say, I looked at it carefully or intensely or something like that. See, on the other hand, is a success verb. So it's not like looking. It's more like find or spot. So it has a connotation of success built into it. So Ryle referred to these verbs as perceptual detection verbs. And these do not admit the imperative mood. I cannot say see. I can ask you if you saw something or see it, but I cannot ask you or tell you to see because of that success that is not entirely under your control. It doesn't normally, typically admit a continuous tense or qualifiers of manner and care. Obviously, exceptions sort of confirm the rule, but that's kind of how these things are divided up. And what I wanted to know is whether children apply this mutualistic conception of seeing only to seeing, that success verb, or if they also use it when the verb look is used. So here's what we did, very simple. We tested 3-year-olds, and we showed them objects and then sort of agents. So these are dolls, so artifacts that are made to be personified, like agents. And we covered up certain parts. So in the case of the dolls, we covered up their eyes, obviously. And in the case of objects, this was just done as a control condition. We covered up salient parts, like their headlights, for example. We also had a clock, and we covered up the hands, things of that sort. And then we simply asked the question, OK, right now, and then child, whatever, clock, can you see the truck? And right now, can you look at the truck? Or in the case of the agent, OK, Clark, right now, can you see the monkey? Or can you look at the monkey? And the idea was that when we use the success verb to see, they should tend to negate that question because they don't get through to the other as a person. There is no eye contact. The success of interpersonal engagement is defect, doesn't work. But in the case of these objects, there is no such an analog, really, right? Like the fact that just a part of this object is covered doesn't really sort of impair that perceptual success. And so here's what we found. These are their positive responses. So basically them saying yes to the question. They could answer verbally or just by nodding or saying, mm-hmm. And right, so here is what we found for the objects. It didn't matter whether you asked the look or the see question. In both cases, they just affirmed almost all the time. Then for the agents, this looks different. When you asked the see question, they were much more willing to deny that they were able to see you. However, not so for the look question. There was no difference between the objects and the look question for the agents. So it was only when you asked whether you can see the agent that they, at least a little bit over 0.5% of the time, were willing to negate the question. So we do think that they have this mutualistic conception of seeing persons, that one can only see another if the other can see that person as well. And this criterion of bidirectionality, that the gaze has to really go both ways, is indeed restricted to the case of seeing. So to those verbs that have that element of upshot or a success built into them. So what Weil called the perceptual detection verbs. And we think that this shows for the first time, people have never looked at that before, but that these kids at this really young age have at least an implicit understanding or knowledge of the different semantics of look and see. Or, I don't know, with Wittgenstein or Weil, you could maybe say of the different logical grammar. So they know that these mean different things, that they're used in different ways, that they have different connotations. They will not be able, of course, to explicitly tell you, oh, look doesn't function quite like see, and you cannot, insert them in all contexts in which you can use see and so on. But at this implicit level, as we have seen through the answers they give to these questions, they do perform that difference. Okay. So we wanted to follow up on this and just know a little bit more about what they're doing here and what exactly is going on. So one thing we wanted to know if they make a difference between dolls and humans. Well, with a human, you can actually have reciprocated gaze. A doll cannot really reciprocate your gaze. It is a cultural artifact made for kids to not bug their parents and, to sort of personify these agents and role play and things like that. But there's no genuine second personal encounter, whereas that obviously happens with humans. So maybe that effect would be enhanced if we had an actual person, the experimenter, sit right in front of the child and say, hey, can you see me now? Maybe that enhances the effect. The other question that we were after is, well, how does this relate to their knowledge of the reciprocal pronoun each other? So in English, you have two such pronouns, each other and one another, right? One another, I guess, is just a more formal version of each other. It's a little less child-friendly, I would say. So we focused on each other. And this was brought to my attention in a conversation that I had with a philosopher friend of mine. And we were wondering if maybe children will be willing to admit and to acknowledge that they can see someone who does not see them once they have this cool word in their vocabulary, because it allows them to verbally capture those felicitous cases in which there is bidirectionality. They now have a special linguistic tool that they can apply to mark that cool and honestly normal situation, right, of us being interrelated and not just me being perceptually related to you, but not vice versa. So maybe once they learn and have in their vocabulary the word each other, that frees up the space to admit that I can also see you when you don't see me, that there are these sort of derivative perspectives, those perspectives on another human that aren't ideal because we don't interlock in that way, but that are still possible. Yeah? But you could also argue exactly the opposite and say, well, no, maybe those kids who know the word each other well at a young age and use that term appropriately are the ones who also are very demanding of reciprocity. They're just sensitive to reciprocity and the absence thereof, and they're good at discriminating individual from reciprocal acts, but they're also demanding of that reciprocity. So that's a possibility as well. So we just honestly sort of investigated into the blue, not knowing if it would go one direction or another. But we also thought that it might be time to come up with a task to see at what age children know those pronouns, because we haven't seen anything in the literature on kids' understanding of each other. Okay, so here's what we did. So we had a human cover up his or her eyes, more or less dramatically, with a bucket or just using her hands. And then we had the same puppets or dolls, and we did the same thing. We covered their eyes up again. And this is the pronoun task that we created. So we just had a very artsy student, Daria. She drew these very nice stimuli for us. And in one, this is the comprehension subtask. The reciprocal pronoun task consists of two subtasks, the comprehension and the production one. And this is the comprehension one. In one, there were always 3 images per page. In one image, one agent performed an act on another. In another image, both agents performed the same act at the same time. But in only one of them did they perform the act to each other. Yeah? So A points at B, A and B are both pointing, and here in the middle one, they're pointing at each other. And the question was simply, hey, Clark, can you show me where they point at each other? Yeah, and then they make their choice by pointing at the respective image. And in the production case, it was a sequence, top to bottom, so we would narrate them through the sequence. So we narrated the first picture, here, he's poking him. And then we go to the second picture, here, he's poking him. And what are they doing there? And then they had to say they're poking each other. Or one another, of course. If they said something, poking together or both poking, then that didn't count. They had to use the term each other. Okay, so here's what we found. First of all, we didn't find any difference between humans and dolls. It was all the same. We found the same difference between look and see, so we replicated our first experiment. They are more willing to negate that they can see an agent than they are willing to negate that they can look at an agent. Everything was a little lower here, so their positive responses were a little less frequent. Overall, I don't know why that is, but we still have that difference between conditions that we care for. It might be that they were slightly older because we didn't want a floor performance on the each other test. We didn't know how 3-year-olds would do on that, so we tested 3.5. Yeah, I can't really explain why more of them now were more willing overall to say no to the perception questions. Maybe it's some kind of pragmatic thing that they think, oh, she must mean whether they can see me because that person's eyes are closed. Something like that. I don't know. With regards to the pronoun task, they were pretty good at it at 3.5. They were, as you always see in those things, right? They were better at comprehension than production, but not significantly so. So that's, I mean, a general pattern that you find with verbal development, that comprehension precedes, to an extent, production. Okay, but again, there was no significant difference. But now what was interesting is that we did find a relation between the knowledge of the pronoun and the willingness to say that they can see you. And here's the relation. basically this mutualistic conception of seeing, denying that you can see another whose eyes are closed, is positively related to their knowledge of each other. So these are all kids, right? These dots, and here are the positive responses to the C questions. These are the ones that deny that they can see you. And they're all here, and they're pretty high up. And the dots that are bigger and circled denote multiple individuals, right? So we had one kid, for example, that got all the pronouns right and said to every question, no, I cannot see you or the doll. And then we had 3 kids, and so on, and 2 kids. And so you see the kind of clusters over here, and then we have a couple of kids high up here too. So we had this positive relation between the mutualistic conception of seeing and knowledge of each other, which means that children who are verbally skillful at discriminating reciprocal from individual acts, they are also the ones that will demand that reciprocity in perception. Okay, so I don't really know how to explain all of this, but we basically try to understand this mutuality constraint that they're bringing to the table a little better. We do know that between the age of 4 and 5, children will start dropping that. I mean, at some point they have to sort of wake up, right, and get sober and understand that you can see another who does not see them. And they do between 4 and 5. We don't really know what exactly drives that, but, oh, why is that so? Oops, no. Anyway, all right. So one possibility to sort of take an explanatory stab at it is maybe to say, okay, maybe they model seeing on touch somehow. You know, touch is necessarily bidirectional. You leave an impression in what's touched and do a touch at the same time. But then again, this is a mere comparison, and what's the value of sort of relating it to this other sense? Why would they be doing it? It doesn't really help us very much. It's just something that's curious and that's noteworthy maybe, but that's all. But otherwise, yeah, from an explanation point of view, maybe not helpful. Another person, this is Jim Russell, who also works on this phenomenon. He thinks that it's all to do with joint attention. And his idea is that it's basically like an SFTP argument, sort of used with regards to intersubjectivity. He says that I need to have my seeing you confirmed by this other sort of pair of eyes that is a witness to my seeing you. Otherwise, it didn't happen. I don't see you unless it's sort of intersubjectively confirmed or validated. But that doesn't really make any sense because we have an experimenter there who asks the question, and in the case of the doll, when the doll's eyes are covered, his eyes would, you know, be perfectly fine to bear witness to that seeing of the doll. And so what this just cannot explain is the fact that the seeing has to come back from the person looked at, and not just from anyone. It has to really be eye contact. It doesn't matter if there's a third person who sees me looking at this partially occluded person. So that doesn't really help. What I think is really going on is that young kids understand seeing as a form of engagement with something. They don't yet understand that seeing is different from hearing or from using any other sense modality. They just kind of understand that you're engaging with, or that you're preoccupied with an object. And this engagement that they're striving for in the case of humans or dolls is an interpersonal one. And that just fails unless there is that moment of mutual recognition, which is best constituted by eye contact. So I can sort of elaborate a little bit on that, but we have this other section of the talk in which I want to talk about false belief understanding, but that's basically kind of what I'm trying to get at. And I don't know in how far that really extends beyond a description of the phenomena, or if I'm actually sort of explanatorily adding something to it. It's a little tricky, but yeah. So we also have reached sort of like a transition in the talk. So if you want to ask any questions about this stuff, I would suggest that we do that now, and then we can move on to the second half. Yes.
So I have one specific technical question and one. Well, I'll save the left field question for later because you might be relevant to the second half of the talk. The technical question is about the experiment where you blacked out the eyes of the doll and you had the face of a car, and you said you also did it with clock faces and so on. So
with what?
Clock faces.
Yes.
And so on. Yeah. Did you analyze it within the object, the non-doll objects? Because I would not be surprised if the car is actually processed as a face, and the results for the car are more like the doll than the other objects.
There were no differences between the objects that we used. It was, I can tell you specifically what it was. So it was the clock and we covered up the hands. Yeah. It was the car and we covered up the headlights. And it was a house and we covered the windows. So sometimes you have a kind of similarity with the physiognomy of the human face, with the two parts that are kind of central and all that. And sometimes it's more of a functional thing. Actually, I was more worried about the clock because the clock uses its purpose. Loses its purpose entirely when the hands are gone. It's hardly even a clock at this point. But even that didn't keep them from still affirming.
Okay, you get the same results for all three
of
those.
Right, yeah. And so you can do different things. Another possibility, something that I thought of, what about if you use a spoon and you cover up the bowl area, so now it's indistinguishable, not just as a token, but as a type. I mean, you don't even know, is it a fork, is it a knife, right? So what if that happens, then the whole object is kind of almost gone. But we don't think that any of that has an effect. So probably not. So partial visibility means sort of visibility of the object as a whole, kind of. That's our idea. I mean, I don't know where it switches when almost everything is covered, but that's maybe not so interesting to explore those boundaries. I don't know.
You said that you thought that maybe they were processing C in the same way that they do here. Towards the end, where you were explaining that like C might just as another sense it could be very similar to here, and I was curious with here. Or with some other sort of sense verbs. It seems like C is really unique in that it is necessarily simultaneous, whereas something like here could be a sort of serial but nevertheless reciprocal action. So I can hear you, or like you're hearing me now, but I'm not hearing you because we're not talking at the same time.
Yeah,
I was curious if you looked at any of the sort of temporality of some of these verbs.
Yeah, that's very interesting, and we're doing that now. So we're doing the same thing with hearing and listen to. So, you have the same difference between inspection and detection verbs in the other senses. So usually the ones with the preposition are the ones that are behavioral and not mental. So listen to is I can ask you to listen, right? Listen up. But I cannot ask you to hear. So mental is to see as listen to is to look at. Make sense? Yeah, and so we're going to do the same thing. So if I have my ears shut, can you still hear me? And can you still listen to me? Probably listen to yes, hear, I don't know. Maybe we have to mutually hear each other for you to be able to hear me. But you're right in that vision has a kind of assumes a special prominent position among the senses because it doesn't just come with that simultaneous recognition, but also, and this I think it's different from touch in that regard, it doesn't just come with that possibility of being bidirectional, but also there's that moment of, there's a meta-awareness of that, so to speak, on it, not meta, but an awareness of that. In the eye contact, it sort of becomes undeniable that we have actually seen each other, right? So, and there's not really an analog for that in any of the other senses. And as you say, hearing, it's more sequential and more sort of turn-taking based than simultaneous. So could be really different. We think that maybe the mutuality criterion is just limited to the case of seeing.
This might be something that you talk about in the second half, so just don't answer. But speculatively, another thing about C is that it's there's a polysemy in the language in English anyway.
Yeah.
I would suspect in a lot of languages with regards to perceptually seeing and also knowing something.
Yeah.
And a lot of our ways of talking about knowing use this metaphor of seeing. And so, do you think that this could be related, to or do you have any ideas about how this built-in semantics of the word and conflation could explain, so if two people don't know one another, maybe some of the variance is explained by that, like they're answering sort of in a polysemous sense of they don't see, like they don't know each other is seeing each other, or something of this kind.
Like recognize, yeah.
Right, but sort of, in a way, maybe taking the question slightly differently. Because the word...
That's possible, yeah. I don't know. And how far children are aware that it's seeing that lends itself so well to, or is used for metaphors of understanding and knowledge. I'm not sure. Could be. Yeah. But I'm not going to get at that in a second. Yeah?
So, I mean, it's a fascinating mistake, if you will, that the kids are making, and that the pattern is quite compelling. So I'm not challenging that at all. But I'm wondering how particular to English this distinction is. So there was a time when I spoke Indonesian reasonably well, and it has see and look, but I don't think that see has the special status that. So you can use see as an imperative in Indonesian.
Oh yeah. Oh, okay.
In a way that is a lot like look.
I don't know. I mean, many languages have it, the distinction, certainly not all. I know German has it, and I have piloted this with German kids, and it's the same pattern.
Yeah, I mean,
yes.
But the languages are so closely related.
Right. Sam, what is it in Farsi? Do you have an analogous?
I think you can actually do, like Indonesian, see and look, and Farsi you can use them almost interchangeably.
Oh. Well, what is the difference in connotation? At least in the coloring, there must be some difference.
I have to think about that. It doesn't just spring out at me.
But you have two verbs as well.
Yeah.
Or probably more. I mean, more, right?
Yeah. But definitely, there is a distinction analogous on what the seeing and looking at something. But one question I had kind of related to two previous ones. Like, if a child is playing with a toy and can't do something with it, and an adult comes and says, this is how you do it, see, then how is that sort of interpreted? You know what I mean?
Ah, yes.
See, it can be done.
Right, right. But so now it was more phrased as a question, right? So but maybe I'm misinterpreting because you were saying it can be used imperatively. I don't think it's, but I see what you're saying, like that they understand see as implying a form of success, or
yeah.
Or do you understand as understanding? Oh, imperative.
Like in an imperative sense, see, and instead of just look, but see that this can be done or this can be made.
But I think your intonation would go up with see, and it's more like a question than it is, a request. I mean, look, it's really go, look over there. And see is, you kind of have to ask the person if she's seeing, right? And so just to make that distinction clear again, I can look out the window or through these glasses, but I can really fail to see anything because maybe it's totally dark outside, or my vision is distorted because the glasses aren't right for me. So I'm looking. That's the sheer behavior of having my eyes directed at something, right? And me trying to see, but I'm failing to see. So I am certain that the see does have that quality of upshot, sort of getting through to, But there's all these other differences. For example, you would say, let's go see the doctor, or let's go see Aunt Lucy, or whatever, and you won't say, let's go look at Lucy, or let's go look at the doctor. But that maybe, again, confirms this, in the case of persons, where persons are the object of perception, that it has that reciprocal connotation. Yeah?
Except you can say things like, come and see the bearded lady. And what
Excuse
you mean
me?
by that is come and look at the bearded lady.
Yeah,
come
and
and
see.
the Constitution.
That's right.
That's
That's right. Yeah, come and see. But maybe then it's the come that carries that, no? Without that, you couldn't see that. I think it's a question when you use sheet, but okay, I don't know. I mean,
I guess where I was going, and I don't want to derail the talk, so
Yeah.
I do want to hear what you have to say about the rest, is if my weakly empirically informed conjecture is correct, that there are languages which draw the distinctions that you expect them to draw, but they don't map precisely onto the distinctions in English. It seems to me if you're arguing something about, say, an evolved mechanism that is designed to process information about joint attention, then you should expect the same developmental differences independent of language. But if there's something special about how children are learning what the words mean, then you should see big differences across languages. And that seems like an important question to answer before we move forward.
You guys have to answer that question. You guys have to take this study places, and so this is a first exploratory stab at something, but okay.
All right, so now let's talk a little bit about something that's related. It still all has to do with perspective taking, but in a different sort of context. And here, perspective taking is actually more sort of desired. Again, remember the kids weren't supposed to perspective take when you say, can you see that person? You're not really supposed to think about what they see, but that's precisely what the kids did. So this is different. This is about theory of mind development. So you guys have probably all heard of that awful term. Such a misleading term because it's not a theory. It's not all about the mind necessarily either. So we just kind of refer to this as social cognitive abilities, and there's a whole large number of them. And the litmus test for whether a kid has a theory of mind has always been in the past whether she understands false beliefs, right? You might be familiar with that. And the reason for that is, I think, is that beliefs have that direction of that mind to world direction of fit. You want the belief to fit what the world is actually like. It is supposed to represent the world to you, right, and others. And so unlike desires and hopes, which have a world to mind direction of fit, you want the world to be just like your mind is, right? This is different, and so there's the possibility of error comes in. There's no possibility of error in a desire. You might be kind of crazy to be desiring something that might be unattainable, so that might be something that you don't want to do, but you're not wrong in the way you are wrong when you misrepresent reality. So there's a genuine sort of error possibility. And that's somehow, I think, why that is so interesting. And the question is, do kids understand that the world can be one way, but that people represent it in a way that clashes with reality? And the way that this has been investigated so far is exclusively through sort of what I call rational measures. This is a very wide notion of rational. The classic case is the making judgments, asking them to make a judgment and say, so if I take if Clark leaves the room, now were to leave the room and I would take his phone, that's too obvious because it's right there. If I were to steal his wallet from his pocket, no, that doesn't work because you're taking it with you. So it doesn't matter. So yeah, so the pencil is perfect. So if he were to leave now, he would come back thinking that the pencil is still under the piece of paper, right? So the main way in which this has been investigated is kids were just asked simply, okay, now if Clark returns, where is he going to look for his pencil? And again, I moved it in the meantime and I put it someplace else. And the finding has been that up until the age of 4 to 5, kids will say that he will look for his object where it actually is. So if I put it in my purse, then they will say he's going to look there, where it really is. They don't understand that he can misrepresent the world in this case that way. So that's, you guys know that task, right? And so that's a rational measure because the child has to come up with a propositional statement about how Clark relates propositionally to the world. So he believes that the pencil is still under the piece of paper. Now, new studies have done away with these judgments and have tried to look at things more indirectly by looking at kids' sort of perceptions and how long they look at something and mainly how long they look at something or what they prefer to look at to get at infant understanding of this. But these are very reductive kind of measures, and they don't tell you so much. You can't really know what's going on just because they look longer at one thing than another. And these are, again, affect neutral because they don't get at the sort of interesting fact that when he comes back, he's going to be quite surprised that the pencil is no longer there. And for that chocolate, he will probably also be like really disappointed that it's gone. So this element of, and the philosopher Donald Davidson really brought up nicely this nexus between surprise and belief. So you can really only be surprised. So he understood surprise as a belief-based emotion. You can only be surprised if you have a belief that ran counter reality. So we want to get at their understanding that the agent will be surprised and disappointed when he hits reality. And what sort of got me into this is knowing how kids get emotionally involved when they observe others, and especially when they observe when things go wrong for other people. So these are photographs taken by Alfred Eisenstadt in the 40s, I think, the German-born American photographer. And so these are kids watching puppet shows. And you know the structure of puppet shows is probably kind of always the same. There's like a guy or a woman who wants to do something, but then it doesn't really work. And the kids know that, but the protagonist doesn't know. Or he has like crocodile right up his neck, or he keeps turning around, the crocodile keeps turning with him, so he never sees it. And the kids are like warn him and try to inform him and get really excited because of the suspense that builds up, because this guy doesn't know what you know. And that's sort of what I wanted to work with. So just a few more pictures, but just because they're so cool. They're like pressing the other guy's hand, the more tense they get. And this guy is probably shouting that there's a wolf or crocodile behind him, or so, and he doesn't even want to hear it. He's going into denial. So psychoanalytically, this is really interesting too. And the hysterical girl with the glasses is screaming. So, what happens is, and what Hitchcock was such a master at doing, to build up suspense, right? And again, that's the emotion that comes about when you know that somebody else doesn't know something. And it's that tension that arises from the audience being provided with privileged knowledge that the protagonist is missing. And that's what he really was so good at. And it shows, when you feel suspense, it shows that you have a sense of that clash between reality and how it is construed or misconstrued by the protagonist. And it really is a blend of the emotion of the other guy. You expect him to be disappointed, but your own emotion blends into it as well, because you're anticipating that. Maybe you have a little bit of schadenfreude in there, and you kind of want exactly that to happen. Who knows, you know? But that's all sort of part of suspense. And so I wanted to look at kids' expressions as they anticipate the wrongdoing of a misinformed agent. And I thought expressions would be interesting to look at, because they are not rational measures like that. We don't ask them to come up with a perfectly grammatically structured sort of sentence about where Clark is going to look for his pencil, or what he thinks, where does he think the pencil is, so they don't have to respond to these difficult questions like that. But it's also more than just looking at one thing longer than another, at, for example, a situation that is belief congruent versus one that is belief incongruent. So this gets at more stuff, because it shows that they understand that it has this evaluative aspect built into it. It shows that they understand the narrative and have the conceptual apparatus down, that you need to understand, oh, he's going to be disappointed, he's going to hit on a reality that he doesn't expect, and that is going to upset him, and things like that. But again, it does not rely on any overt sort of communication of propositional attitudes. And so here's what we did. I showed 3-year-olds, and now we're testing 2.5-year-olds, puppet shows involving the change of an object's either quantity. So Cookie Monster has like 9 cookies in his box and leaves the stage, and 7 are taken away. So that's a severe reduction, and that's a bummer. And so we want to see if they understand that when he returns, he's going to be surprised for sure and disappointed. Then a change of location. So Lucy played with a bunny and put it in a little cage, but then the zookeeper came and swapped it around with a spider. And so now Lucy comes back and wants to play with her bunny, and there's a danger that she walks straight into the spider. And then we have a change in kind. boy played with his ball and put it into a box, and then when he's gone, this lady comes and plays with it, and then it's a Pokeball, and it changes into a totally different thing, into a bear, and then he will return, and so he will encounter an object of a different kind. And we recorded their expressions as the protagonist sort of naively came back on stage and said, now I'm gonna go get my cookies, right? And so what's important is that there are still cookies, so the expression of that intention, the realization of the intention will not fail. He can still get cookies. It's just subjectively there's less. Yeah, so we did not want to create a situation that objectively doesn't work. Like, I want to get cookies. Well, wait a minute, there are no cookies, because even a child that had just entered the room and heard that and knows what's in there would be startled or surprised. But that's not the situation we have. It's only sort of from the subjective expectation of the protagonist that things go wrong. Yeah. And we always, of course, have a true belief comparison. So we have the same 3-year-olds watch situations in which the rightly informed agent returns after he witnessed that change. So the change always occurs, the cookies are being taken away and all that, but in some cases, Cookie Monster sees from the side of the stage that that is what was going on. So he is now rightly informed. So just to walk you through the procedure, so Cookie Monster has the stack of cookies, puts them in a box and says he has to go to the bathroom. We have very ecologically valid sort of scenarios, so he goes to the bathroom, and then the doctor takes most cookies away and puts only those 2 back in the box, and then Cookie Monster returns and says, I'm going to get my cookies now. And this is the story with Lucy and her bunny. She has a bunny that she puts in one of those 2 boxes, and when she had to go pick up the phone or something, the zookeeper shows up and swaps them around. So the antagonist is not a villain. He actually has some good intent. The doctor is concerned about Cookie Monster's health. Too many cookies. And the zookeeper also thinks that these are in the wrong boxes because we didn't want to overdo it with the emotion. We didn't want Schadenfreude and the sneaky stuff going on right now. So we didn't do that in this experiment. And I want to show you some videos. So this is a 3-year-old girl who watches the Cookie Monster story, and this is the false belief version. So she just saw him leave, the antagonist messed with reality, and Cookie Monster now wants to get his cookies. And I'd like you to focus on her expressions.
Hi, I'm back. I'm hungry now. It's time to eat my cookies. I'm taking these outside. Bye.
So you always have to watch everything multiple times because every time you see something a little better or different.
Hi, I'm back. I'm hungry now. It's time to eat my cookies.
Furrow brow. Lip bite.
I'm taking these outside. Bye.
So she showed a furrowed brow, which indicates, well, it's always hard to say what do those expressions mean and who's the interpreter here, right? But it seems to happen when they kind of dislike something, when sometimes it shows a concern actually. Where, unlike a raised brow, which is just sort of curiosity, well, this is interesting, what's happening, just sort of an openness to what else is going on. And then she showed that lip bite, and we saw that a lot in kids, and we also saw things not just in the face, we saw a lot of mouth openings. She did that too before the lip bite, she kind of went and then bit it. And we also see that they sometimes just press their hand like this. We also had a kid just hold the hand up in the air like this, or even like put the hand on their mouth and sort of gasp or something like that. And some just kind of wiggle around in their chair a little. and things of that sort. But it's of course important, I mean, you might have really expressive kids to have control. So this is, she functions as her own control. And this is what she does in the true belief condition. Now this, of course, cannot be the same story. We can't play her the cookies monster story one way and then another. So she received the other stories as true belief. And this is the one with the Lucy and the bunny. And let's see how she responds here.
I want to play with the bunny again. I'm taking these outside. Bye!
So this is more continuous. As you see, she's not as concerned, right? She kind of knows that Lucy must know what's going on there. And we didn't see as many expressions. And yeah, so this is a little detailed. What this basically shows you is we tested 24 kids with this procedure, and again, they all function as their own controls. We did a Wilcox and Sign-Rank test with that, and so 5 kids had no expressions in either. So those are tied observations, right? Those are the ties. But then we had 3 kids where it went in the wrong direction. They showed something in the true belief, but nothing in the false. But then all other kids, and this is obviously the majority, 16, showed more expressions in the false belief than in the true belief condition. So they showed that pattern that we just saw in Kylie. And this was highly significant. So. And then we ran another experiment because we needed an ignorance control. So this is now, gets a little nitpicky, but basically to show that the child understands that Cookie Monster really misrepresents reality, we have to show that, we have to find cases where these expressions are absent when he's simply ignorant. Now there's a difference between having a false belief and being ignorant. Everybody who has a false belief is also ignorant. Right? So Cookie Monster, who has a false belief about the number of cookies, is ignorant of the fact that there's only 2. But in addition to being ignorant, he also actually has a false representation of the number of cookies. So we ran an ignorance control in which we had situations, basically what we did is the following. Cookie Monster, we simply informed him in the beginning, hey, here, Cookie Monster, I have a bag of cookies for you. They're in here. You can get them later, okay? And then Cookie Monster leaves, and then we have the same messing with the contents. The cookies are being removed and reduced to 2, and now he comes back. So he is actually informed that there are cookies, but he's underinformed. He doesn't come with a false representation of the number of cookies. Makes sense, right? And the same with, we have a deconstruction story. So we tell someone, hey, I have Legos here for you. They're in this box. You can play with it later. It's actually a whole Lego building that then gets demolished by the antagonist. But he doesn't know that. All he knows is that there's Lego in there, and that could be blocks or in the already constructed form. And the same with a ring. We tell Lucy that we have a ring for her in a little box, and it's actually a cool ring. It's a blinking ring, blinking with a K ring, right? With a light. And so in the false belief condition, she would know that, and she would expect her ring to still blink when she returns, but it gets demolished or somebody breaks it. And then in the ignorance control, again, she never knew of a blinking ring. She just knew that there would be a ring in there. And what we find is the same thing. We've actually found almost no expressions of suspense in that ignorance situation. So here are the data. So this is out of 16 kids. 11 showed the right pattern. They showed false belief expressions, but not when the protagonist returned to the scene being ignorant, only ignorant. We had 4 tied observations, and only 1 kid showed 1 expression ever in an ignorance trial and nothing in a false belief trial. And this, again, is highly significant. So one thing I want to add here is just, and I'm almost at the end of my talk, but one thing I want to add is, of course, there are situations where being ignorant is justified is enough for you to be concerned, right? If you walk up to a spider, then they better go lip bite and all that, because that is a worry. But we constructed situations where ignorance alone would not justify those expressions, and then they do stay away, and they only show them when there's a false belief. Okay, so my last slide, just to wrap up the findings across both halves of the talk. So first of all, this has to do with what we just looked at. 3-year-olds can anticipate another's surprise and disappointment. So they have a false belief understanding that goes beyond just the belief component, but also captures sort of the affective involvement and the affective implications of being wrong, that surprise and disappointment that follows. And that means that they can identify with other agents, and they have an awareness of these affective implications, as I just mentioned. And overall, and this now also includes maybe the first half, we do see accumulating evidence that toddlers are really good at taking other people's points of view, whether that is sort of in the epistemic domain or more affectively. And they also show that when they want to engage with you and have a kind of a second personal encounter, and will therefore be willing to deny that they can see you if you don't see them. So perspective taking also sort of plays into that. And that's just one of my talk. And these are all the people I wish to thank.
I have a question about the first part of your talk, if that's okay.
Yeah.
To go back to that. I was just thinking, sort of from an evolutionary point of view, that it's interesting that these kids below a certain age fail to hide themselves properly. The ostrich thing you were talking about, right? Because if somebody's chasing you and you don't understand that, you're going to die. Right? It's possible that that is true, that kids at that age just aren't developed enough to understand that. But I wonder if you change the context, if it would change their behavior. I mean, I know you didn't actually do the hide and seek thing,
Yeah.
but I mean, you wonder if something about the game, so they sort of know I'm not supposed to get caught, that's the idea, but because it's fun to get caught in the game. I mean, this is one interpretation of hide and seek. It's fun to get caught because it's this, oh, I just got caught, and the kids laugh when they get caught in hide and seek, right? And so maybe, I mean, one possibility is they're less concerned about being found, and another is that they actually want to be found. I mean, because that's another phenomenon that happens in hide and seek. If you take too long with little kids to find them, they'll make noise and stuff to let you know when they're and so I'm thinking, I'm wondering if, would that happen if they're being stalked by a lion or something like that, right? I mean, you think about like the scene in Jurassic Park where the kids hide from the velociraptors in the kitchen, right? And I mean, that's a movie, so who knows? But they know that you have to be deadly quiet, right? Good luck. Dinosaurs can get you, right? So
yeah, well, that's the thing.
I'm just curious, experimentally, could you manipulate it in some way? You don't have a predator, but you changed it so that there's actually, I don't know how you would do it exactly, but make it so that it's not fun to be found.
Did Cost do stuff that was like kind of like that?
Huh? Excuse me?
He asked children where they should hide.
He didn't actually do the task. And then Francis also did something.
Francis did hide and seek things. Yeah, I mean, and this is Francis Steen here. So I mean, he one of his things was that they do enjoy. I mean, and that's the thing. Kids enjoy being
found.
Well, and stalked too. If you go, ooh, I'm gonna get you, right? But they actually like that if it's a person, presumably because they understand play and pretense and stuff. But if it was really like a scary dog or something, coming after them. Not so
well,
much.
there's a difference between hiding and playing hide and seek.
Absolutely.
And it could be that we're just tapping, and that's something that's really hard to figure out. Maybe we just test how they understand the term hide. Namely that this is hiding, whatever this does, right? So that's just really hard to disentangle, but I mean, if you could maybe make it somehow costly for them if they were to get, not by losing their life that costly, but like losing an arm or but like I mean for example candy or something like that.
Or make it competitive with another kid. I mean, I'm sure people have done this, but
but they're really still really bad at it from what I hear, and it's really hard to even get them to compete with you,
right?
Because it's so
I
hard
don't
for
know how
them
you
to
get at
step.
it, but it makes
Yeah.
you wonder if there's something, if, you know, I mean, many tasks, right, the context in which you do it greatly affects
Yes.
the performance, and so I,
Definitely.
I don't know.
Yeah, yeah. I think I was more interested in just the fact, I wasn't claiming that they, oh, wait a minute. I remembered something. They will actually say, I think they will actually say that you can see their body, but not them.
Okay, yeah.
Yeah. So they know, but then what do they think hiding is? I mean, don't they understand that hiding is hiding your body? I mean, what else? Yeah, but that's something that they will say, that they can see your body when you go like that, but not you. So it has to be the pronoun or the name for the person, proper name, or some such. Yeah.
I'm just curious with this, you know, hiding, just to go off of that a little bit, if they're hiding an object for someone else to find, presumably they do a much better job than if they're hiding themselves. But what if they're hiding an animate object or a, you know, doll or something? Do they show the same kinds of fallacies that they do when they're hiding themselves?
Good question. I don't know if that particularly has been done, like hiding a doll. I just know what has been done is if the doll hides like that, is she doing it right? And they will affirm that. I don't think they're. There is that policeman task where they have to like hide a doll from a policeman, but the options were kind of weird. Like there were these different corners, and they could just sort of put it in these. So there wasn't a possibility of only hiding their eyes. They just had to place them in different locations in which they could either fully be seen or fully not be seen. So that doesn't really get at that exactly, but there is a task where they have to hide a doll from another doll. Yeah, good question. Yeah.
Getting back to some of the cross-cultural universality of this, I mean, from the time kids are what, like, I don't know, 6 months old, you're doing
Peekaboo.
this exact thing with them, right? That's the very first version of hide and seek that they get from the time they're babies is peekaboo, right? So I'm just wondering if in a culture that doesn't play the game peekaboo, if they're just thinking about this as a conceptual thing of when you put a black mark over somebody's eyes, you're playing a different some version of that game, versus if you did it in a place where they don't play that kind of game.
Yeah, I actually had a slide on peekaboo in here that I then deleted because I was worried about time, and I didn't really, I don't have any research on particularly that, but I was going to ask you guys if you happen to know if peekaboo is universal.
I think it is.
I would think it is, because you don't even need artifact, you don't need material to do it. You just use your hands, and it comes so natural to even like male teenagers to play that game or something with infants like on a bus or something like that. That I really have the feeling that probably every culture does it, but that's just sheer speculation. I don't know. And we suggest it's kind of like how kids are talked about as if they were egocentric when they say Leo doesn't want to put his jacket on. They speak of themselves, but that's actually what we kind of implant by saying, does Leo want more milk, or Mommy is going to go to the store, talking of yourself in the third person, and then no wonder they're going to talk of themselves like that, right? So, and something similar might be going on with peekaboo. We also instill that, but we say, ooh, where is Tony or whatever, when Tony has a blanket over his head. And so also we make them believe as though they were invisible. But I think that this is not total paternal insanity, and that they just do something that's wrong and sort of is entirely misleading. I think we do that because we have an understanding of where they're coming from, and that this is something that sort of comes natural to them. Basically what we're showing here in the findings, that they do demand that mutual gaze, and otherwise it's sort of not happening, right? So I don't think it's complete sort of madness, but we do foster that by saying stuff like that, and saying, oh, where is Tony now when he's turning around or something like that. So Yeah.
I was intrigued when you were going through the talk, particularly the first part of it.
Yeah.
Not so much of the particular experiments you were doing, but in what it was showing, and thinking something about what a child is also learning at about the same time age through kinship relations.
Yeah.
And I'm thinking, for example, one thing is anthropologist by the name of Marshall Solins, who's argued that one thing that's fundamental to the idea of kinship is what he calls mutuality of being, the sense that I, the person that I am akin to, we have some sense of sharing, that we are part of each other. And when you're making the comment about the scene of mutual recognition, which seems to be that kind of, rather than, I understand you're saying is that with the idea of seeing is not that I as an individual am an independent entity, you're an independent entity, but somehow what I can see is what you can see. There's a sense of, we have this sort of shared aspect between us, which is similar to what he's arguing about the fundamental idea of kinship. Now, which comes first and which comes second is a different matter. This one's picking up on the sort of idea of kinship, this idea of mutuality of recognition, or is it possibly the other way? And the other is also just with children learning kinship relations. That is, of course, at first learning something about, well, mother, father, or mama, daddy, or words that you understand initially in an absolute sense. This is my daddy.
Yeah.
Then having to learn that others also have the same relation.
Yeah.
And it's not the same person.
Yeah.
And so that's that kind of transition from sort of associating in a mutuality sense to then recognizing there's a perspective that you have to build into. There's my perspective that makes him a daddy, and that you have a different perspective which doesn't make him a daddy to you, though you have a daddy to you. It's not daddy to me. So I just wondered whether it might be useful or interesting to just look at some aspects about what's happening at the level of kinship development, understanding the kids are having, and how some of these relations that you're picking up in that change around 4 to 5 years of age, whether there's some sort of connection between the two, because it would seem like something like this is not just in the aspect of seeing all by itself, but they relate in a broader sense to conceptualization that gets used not only in the area of seeing, but in other areas as well.
Yeah, that's very cool. I don't know that kinship term literature, how the kids sort of acquire that exactly, or how I don't know how I would do that now, but I think that's a good idea. And I do like this idea that they have this bipolar notion of seeing, kind of like giving, and I do think that they're in some ways, they also speak a philosophical truth that we sort of, that actually engaging with another qua person, not qua object, does involve that mutual recognition and that mutual awareness. That's something very true that they articulate in their interesting responses. They have an intuition of that. Yeah. Yeah.
Just quick, I mean, that difference between my daddy and a daddy, I think, is something kids can articulate from really young. So it is an interesting one that you could get it way before 3.
So then it wouldn't really,
you could probably get it at 1.5 if the kids are verbal enough that they can definitely distinguish those two things, and that it seems like it plugs right into the exact same kind of idea. It'd be a cool one to do.
So here's the left field comment question. And it came to me right at the beginning of your talk when you were talking about the distinction between, if I got you right, between taking another's perspective and being aware that you're taking another's perspective. I read recently a really good book by Michael Graziano called Consciousness and the Social Brain. And if I understand his book right, and I need to read it again, he's arguing that consciousness is essentially taking, it's a meta-representation of your own representations of the world. It's an awareness of your own perspective. And so there seems, I mean, it basically saying making the same distinction you seem to be making. So the left field question, I guess, is do you know any link to consciousness and the other meta-representations and so on?
It has to do with consciousness. I mean, I think that there is a way in which kids have to learn how to do things. That's the tricky part, and I'm writing a theoretical paper on all of this, but it's really difficult to get the right discrimination. So I want to say something like the following.
that they know how to perspective take. They have the know-how or practical ability to perspective take before they have the know that. That's also Riley distinction, the know-how versus know that, right? That they are doing that, and then the question is, okay, what's the right terminology? Is it know-how versus know that? Is it practical knowledge versus theoretical knowledge? So if the practical precedes the theoretical understanding of what they're doing, or what's the right way of thinking about this? Or is it like you're kind of saying there's an object level and a meta level that we kind of have to distinguish? But it is certainly true that they can, and you know, in how far does the embodiment literature play into that? I'm not a big fan of that. I think they're totally overdoing it, and to the extent that that is correct, it is boring and known already, and to the extent that that would be interesting, it's wrong. So I'm not a fan of this whole embodied stuff, but I do think that the kids can practically have an ability to do things before they really sometimes know what it exactly is that they're doing. And that also fits well with the fact that they imitate before they oftentimes understand what the imitation is good for, what they exactly were doing on a more sort of conceptual level.
What's your best guess about when kids do start to develop the know that? What's your best guess about when kids do develop the know that aspect of?
I think that depends on the what you're looking at.
Okay.
Knowing how to do what versus knowing that you're doing what. I think that really depends on what you're looking at. But here, like, there's still that watershed of 4 to 5 years that still exists where, and that has to do with them also solving the explicit false belief task. There is something very real going on, and we have seen it, we see it all the time, where something comes to them, right? And the same with infantile amnesia goes away at that age. You know, you cannot remember anything that happened to you when you're 2 unless you're different somehow, or it was traumatic or something maybe. But and the variance is huge there, and then you have the problem of validity and you know, like, do you really remember, or did someone show you a picture and you think you remember, and all that stuff. But infantile amnesia seems to go away between 4 and 5 too, and we think there's like a common nexus. But it's really hard to spell out what exactly it is that they learn.
Yeah, so Graziano's consciousness story seems to tap into that.
Yeah.
Quite nicely, the infant amnesia thing, you know, that's
definitely. Yeah.
Interesting.
Yeah.
So, with the caveat that it's easy for me to sit on the couch and tell you what you should do, so I want to perseverate a little bit on the language question. I don't think that you need to be an anthropologist doing cross-cultural research to investigate these questions. So, for example, if it is the case that Farsi doesn't carve these distinctions in exactly the same way that English and German do, I don't think it would be that hard to find, you know, 3-year-old native-speaking Farsi children in the city of Los Angeles.
No, that's true.
And it would be really interesting if they're different than the English speakers, and there might be a gradation based on how bilingual they are at that age.
Yeah, that's true.
So, you know, because the question is fundamentally anthropological, doesn't mean you have to, you know, get on a steamship with trunks and try to stick it there, right? Second, I want to turn to the second half of the talk a little bit, which is, it seemed to me, I understood, I think, the logic behind many of your control conditions, and to a certain extent, especially if what you're talking about is affect, then questions of empathy versus sympathy start to become important. And maybe it's setting the bar too high, but it would be interesting to kind of look at the boundary conditions anyway, by looking to see whether the kids can show the appropriate suspenseful affective displays when the protagonist has preferences that are antithetical of their own. Okay, so I love to eat spiders, and you know, I'm looking forward to finding all my spiders there, and somebody has replaced them with bunnies or something like that, right? Now, if you can do that, then I'm totally convinced that your affective displays reflect, you know, extensive perspective taking.
Yeah, I understand. We still think that we have it in the sense that it is still really all hinges on the subjective expectation that the protagonist comes back with, because 2 cookies is better than no cookie, right? Or a ball in a box is better than no ball in a box. But it was reduced from a ball this big that the guy wanted to play with, and now it's like a tiny, crappy, like dirty ping pong ball or something. And so we do think that we do get at the false belief and really at the person's sort of perspective on reality. But maybe what you're saying has definitely has that built into it as well. It would definitely also be perspective taken. It's a strong case because maybe you're also tapping some executive functions there than this whole, you know, understanding of conflict and inhibitory control. Okay, for me, it would, you have to shut out maybe a little more or suppress a couple of other things if you were to do it the way you're saying, where you have those opposing desires. But yeah. Okay.
Time for one more question? Okay.
Thank you. And if you have kids or grandkids or whatever, sorry, you don't look that old, but you know, if you have nieces, nephews, send them all to the other university, to our place, and help us. Yeah, I urgently need 1 to 5-year-olds, so yeah, and they get cool toys, not the sort of tacky ones that make a lot of noise and are obnoxious, but the nice wooden stuff that we all like. So yeah.